what is your handbook onboarding process, right? So I think what I'm hearing from you is, okay, maybe not that big a difference going from employee number 15 to 16, but going from 16 to 50, there's a hell of a difference, right? That's a very huge company to run. And I think what I'm hearing from you, you didn't use the words, but I will, scale. It's how do you take these best practices that you started out with, being passionate and hardcore about managing to your culture, what's the right kind of culture, the kind of people that you want on board, getting that talent on board, and then paying them right. That's your core foundation. Now, how do you scale that? And you do that with consistency and process, and having well-defined processes so these things are repeatable. Welcome to Mission to Grow, the small business guide to cash, compliance, and the war for talent. I'm your host, Mike Vannoy. Each week, we'll bring you experts in accounting, finance, human resources, benefits, employment law, and more. You'll learn ways to access capital through creative financing and tax strategies, tactical information you need to stay compliant with ever-changing employment laws, and people strategies you need to win the war for talent. Mission to Grow is sponsored by Assure. Assure helps more than 100,000 businesses get access to capital, stay compliant, and develop the talent they need to grow. Enjoy the show. All right, welcome to Mission to Grow. This is episode 2 out of a 4-part series. Really excited. I would invite you to follow along. If you hop on the website, assuresoftware.com, go to resources, ebooks, download HR Roadmap for Growing Your Business at Every Stage. Here's what we did. Put together a list of what are the HR priorities, what are some of the HR challenges, what are the tools that a business needs, and then what laws must they comply with as you grow your businesses. So 4 chapters. First chapter, growing at 1 to 15 employees. We covered that topic last week. Today, we're going to cover growing at 16 to 49 employees. So when you go from to employee number 16 and you're growing up to 50, well, that world changes a whole bunch of what you need to be thinking about how you run your business. Next week, we're going to cover 50 to 150 employees. And the following week in the series, we'll go 150 employees and above. Because each stage of this business it really calls for something very different. We talked a lot last week in the 1 to 15 employees. I mean, getting culture, it's kind of everything. Employee number 1, you got to get culture right, and you got to get the basics. You got to get payroll right. Okay, you got payroll right. You've established your culture. You're hiring your people. Probably, spoiler alert, time to get a little more systematic now that you're thinking about how do I go from 15 up to 50 employees. So great panel today. If you watch the show regularly, Mary Simmons, our own Vice President of HR Compliance Consulting. Welcome to the show, Mary.
Thanks, Mike.
We have Heather James, who is a benefits manager in our Tampa office and expert in all things benefits administration, especially for this size audience and newcomers to this size audience. Welcome, Heather.
Thanks, Mike.
And Chris Cooley, who comes to us from an Assure partner, My HR Screens, background screening, and much, much more. So welcome to the show, Chris.
Yeah, no, I'm glad to be here.
Okay, so let's follow along. I'm going to flip to the section 16 to 49 employees. And here we are. So you've established a culture. You're paying your employees accurately and on time. You're following the Fair Labor Standards Act, the FLSA, around minimum wage and overtime. Mary, I think we'll probably talk employee handbook at every call we'll ever do together. But we established the need to have an employee handbook, kind of rules of the road. Now I'd say we're kind of grown up, and it's time to move to another level in the business. And as you go transition and from the 16 to 50 employees, I'll call it. Let's just tackle the first section here in the ebook. What are the HR priorities at this stage? So we're going to get to challenges in a minute, but what are the things that businesses need to be focused on for their priorities? Chris, let me start with you.
Yeah, no. So, as to your point earlier, we've grown. We're getting into that 15, 16 larger groups. So it's setting those standards, setting those processes. Also, what happens is as you start growing, you get a little more buzz. You have more employees, you have those things. And so it's really important to, at that point, we feel we need a background check for the first employee. But now we've got more risk. right? We've got more revenue. We've got more buzz. We have more people that, quite honestly, there's a lot more risk from the employees that you're hiring. So it's really important to do your background checks so that, one, you're protecting your business from you want to make sure that you don't have employees out there that are doing things they shouldn't, right? We don't want them to go to a client's location and steal or anything. Two, you're protecting your employees because you don't want a violent offender on site. You don't have to deal with that. And then three, it's really insurance. It's making sure that you're protecting your company from those situations, whether it's with a client or whether it's internal.
So, Chris, you obviously have a bias. You see the HR world through the lens of background screens, which makes perfect sense. So, what your is? Am I thinking about it right to say, okay, so I'm a smaller startup kind of a company. I'm 1 to 15 employees. Those first 5 employees, they could have been family members, right? And maybe at least I start hiring outside the family by the time I get up to number 15. But it's probably true that you're outside of the family, you're outside of the people you know, you're outside of the people who know the people you know. You're starting to hire strangers at this point when you're over 15 employees. Is that fair to say?
It is. What I will say too is even when you're in that 15 to 16 and you're hiring through referrals, you still got to be very careful. For instance, we had a client, they background checked everybody that came in as a hotel, and they hired their friend's son. They've known him forever.
Sure.
They bring him in. They don't background check him. They don't drug testing because they know him.
Yeah.
Well, that friend's son ends up selling drugs as a manager out of their hotel. And so it's very important, that even if they are referrals, that we're still, that we're still background checking to make sure who we're bringing into our business.
Yeah. Mary, that kind of ties back to where we were last week in the 1 to 15 employees, hyper protective of your culture. I got 2 thoughts going through my head, but I'd like you to piggyback on Chris's comment and then want your thoughts. Number one is just because you're getting bigger, it doesn't mean you get to forget culture. You need to protect that fiercely. And then you do have to be thinking about risk mitigation. Okay, I don't know this person, or I don't really know them. Maybe they were referred to me. Why should you be at least considering background checks, piggyback on Chris? Then what are the priorities that you see?
Yeah, so a couple of things that Chris brought up that make a lot of sense. First of all, you can't be inconsistent. So that organization, even though they knew the person that was referred in, they obviously didn't know him well enough. And whenever you're inconsistent in any of your practices, you leave yourself liable. Now your other employees, and this speaks to culture, your other employees go, oh, because they knew him, they didn't do a background check, and now look what's happened to the organization, right? So that inconsistency hurts the culture, and it also helps the other employees find ways to possibly leverage litigation against the organization. So we always want to be consistent. And again, that is what I would say for employers under 16 employees. But now that we're getting a little bit bigger, as Chris said, we do need some processes. So one of the things that I think these employers need to think about is an organizational chart. So is that mandatory at all for any employers? No, it's not. But that organizational chart is going to significantly help the growth of the organization. You don't want, if Chris was a manager, I don't want too many people under him. And if you're a high potential employee, what am I doing with you? Where can you go next? And that's what that organizational chart helps you. It helps you understand where you need to grow, in which departments. Do you have the right people? Do you have the right training? It's going to inform a lot of the rest of the processes that you do, right? Where do I need training, et cetera? Where do I need to recruit? So that organizational chart is one of the things that I would start with. We talked about a handbook for the smaller employers. Now that handbook is going to be a little bit bigger because there's more compliance at this employee count. And then that HR function needs to be real. What do I mean when I say that it's real? Not only does it have to have compliance, but there's best practices that we're going to recommend. In Chris's example, if we're supporting that client, we're going to say, you still have to do a background check on this young man. It's consistent. That's your process. You stick to your process, right? That's why the process is there, especially on the HR side. But those are, I could go on and on and on, but having those process, what are you doing for what's your recruitment process? What's your onboarding? What's performance management? And what's your termination process? All needs to be very succinctly set up for this organization.
I think it makes a lot of sense. And I keep tying my brain back to last week, 1 to 15 employees. We didn't advocate for going by your gut, but the reality is everything you're doing is the first time you're doing it, right? So establishing a culture, getting your payroll right, getting a handbook right. What is your handbook onboarding process, right? So I think what I'm hearing from you is, okay, maybe not that big a difference going from employee number 15 to 16, but going from 16 to 50, there's a hell of a difference, right? That's a very huge company to run. And I think what I'm hearing from you didn't use the words, but I will, scale. It's how do you take these best practices that you started out with, being passionate and hardcore about managing to your culture, what's the right kind of culture, the kind of people that you want on board, getting that talent on board and then paying them right. That's your core foundation. Now, how do you scale that? And you do that with consistency and process and having well-defined processes so these things are repeatable. Am I putting words in your mouth? Or is that?
No, that's perfect. I think I would add one thing, and that would be training. So now if we have 16 to 50 employees or 49 employees, now we have some managers. So prior to this, we had such a small organization. Heather could be the owner and have 14 employees. So you can train the employees, absolutely, but you probably didn't have managers to train. Now we have managers to train. So now my business owner is just a little bit further away from all of those employees, from touching those employees as much as they did in that smaller business. So let's add some training on how to manage people, right? Those managers know how to make the widgets of that organization pretty well. And we can't forget about that training either, but managing them or training them to manage people is very important, ties back to every single thing we talked about: process, compliance, engagement, culture.
Yeah. Heather, let me switch to you. What do you think the HR priorities are? So you come at this from a day-to-day administering benefit plans like HSA, FSA, COBRA, etc. But let's step back from the tactical for a second. What do you think the HR priority should be for a small business as it grows from 16 up to 49, 50 employees?
Yeah, I mean, definitely taking into consideration of that type of growth, especially as you get near that 20 or more employees number.
And we're going to come to 20. We're going to come to 20 employees and why that's so important to you. But yeah.
But no, the insurance is definitely, to me is a priority, being in the benefits side of the business, because, this is where you start to add some value to these employees and providing them, something that can help take care of themselves, their family, being preventative with their healthcare so that they can show up to work every day. And finding those right plans for your employees too, and adding values to those plans. So like you said, the FSAs and the HSAs, what type of plan do I have? What can I attach with that type of plan to make it richer for my employees? And maybe providing a couple of different options, because maybe one plan isn't suitable for all of your staff. So that's where, we like to have those types of conversations with clients is, what kind of plans are you offering and how can you grow into those types of plans too as you start to get more employees?
It's interesting. Chris and Mary, you guys didn't go to benefits. A lot of times I think 50 employees, Affordable Care Act, now all of a sudden the law requires me to provide. Increasingly, we're seeing small businesses, dare I say, forced to offer benefit plans only because they have to compete. The labor market is very, very tight. Topic for another day. Mary, you and I have talked about this in many shows. The labor shortage is not going away. And so just to simply compete now, maybe small businesses can't compete with very rich benefit plans yet, but they do have to be thinking about benefits. Chris, Mary, Heather, jump in here. What are the things that you think that small business owner, let's stick on the smaller end of this, from say the 15 to 25-ish employees, how should they be thinking about benefits, knowing they might not have the budget for a rich health plan, vision, dental, health, but how should they be thinking about benefits for recruiting and retaining the kind of talent they're going to?
Yeah, you can't retain or attract the best talent if you don't have some benefits. So it has a direct ROI in my mind, besides the great reasons that Heather said, right? If your employees aren't well and they don't have appropriate benefits, they're not coming to work they're going to miss work for a much longer amount of time than if you've put into place some preventative health measures as well as health measures to take care of them when they're not well. But like you always say, Mike, you cannot compete out there for talent. It's very hard. If you don't have benefits right now, you're not attracting or retaining talent.
And there are things for small groups. It's so important that they have a good benefits advisor, because there's so many different ways you can do it. You can do, for small groups, you can do HRIS. You can do obviously level funded plans, which are so hot right now. So many small businesses have them because they are at a lower price point. But also what we find is it's a lot of those little things too. Like we give identity theft protection to all of our employees, pet protection. All of that seems like, I'm old school. All that seems kind of crazy, right? But it's something that a lot of people like. Yeah. And so it's being creative and figuring out what these benefits are and the way that you can put them together from a tax perspective and from a cost perspective.
Yeah. And I love that you brought up ICHRA, because that's definitely something that's really valuable for small employers that don't have a group plan, but they want to help with the cost associated with an individual policy that the employee has gone out and purchased on their own.
You're going to have to explain that acronym that you just said.
Individual coverage HRA.
There you go.
So, yeah.
What the hell is an ICHRA?
That's your individual coverage HRA. So that is your employees that are actually out going and getting their own individual policies. And the employer is now going to provide a contribution towards that policy. So, maybe you have 4 or 5 employees, they all have their own individual policy, and you as the employer want to offer a contribution towards that, similar to like what you would do on an employer group plan. But you're not supplying the plan, you're just offsetting some of those costs for the employees, tax-free basis. So it's, we could go on and on about how those plans work on a whole other podcast.
Yeah.
They're a nice start, and what a lot of employers are starting to educate themselves on until they get to an area where they can afford a group plan.
Mary talks all the time that, if you do something that is a benefit for the employee, even if it's free, you might think this is no big deal. Put it in the app. You're competing against the Fortune 500 company down the street and the business that is in the same industry as you are across the street. You're all competing for the same labor pool. So I loved your idea, Chris. It's like, okay, maybe you're partnered with a background check vendor. The ROI is ridiculously high there. It's easy. But if it bundles in a free identity management, it's like, put that in the ad. Work for us, and we'll proactively monitor your identity theft free of charge. Oh, that's great. Okay. they might cost them $19 a month for it to do it themselves, but it seems like a huge benefit when my company provides it to me for free, right?
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. We've had, I mean, our employees, we've gotten a really good response from it. So it's something that worked well. Today, as many, I mean, you think about how many spam emails you get a day, wanting you to click on the document. It's so important. And then what happens is if they don't do it and they have identity theft, how many hours are they going to spend outside of work trying to get their identity back? Again, it's just a small example, but it's something that makes a difference.
No, I said I've seen a lot of popularity with the gym reimbursements. That's
Mhm.
become really popular with employees and something that's not overly expensive to kind of help out the employees.
Right.
But I love the pet insurance. That's become popular too.
Yeah. Yes. Last thing I want to spend on here. So when I think about all the changes a business goes through, going from this 16 to 25, 25 to 50, you're really leveling up. And I keep coming back to where you were going, Mary. It's scaling. It's consistency. It's processes. It's an org chart. It's training. It's not just training on the skills required to perform the job. It's skills of managing people, because somewhere in here in this, maybe at 15 employees, you already have a manager, but certainly to get to 25, you're not doing this by yourself. You have people, at least shift supervisors, at least. You get to 50, now you have bona fide managers. What about performance? Mary, you mentioned it, but when you're a 10-person company, there's not a lot of places to hide, right? The low performers stand out. Generally, high-performing employees don't like to work with low-performing employees, and they kind of do the performance management hard stuff for you because they make the sucky people uncomfortable, and the sucky people leave on their own. But as you grow and you scale up, hate to say it, low performers can hide easier. And you're going to have a grown-up performance management process as you graduate to this level. So how should employers be thinking about performance management as they grow through this phase?
Yeah, we usually look at it in two buckets, right? So one bucket is, are we setting the expectations? And when the expectations aren't met, what's the, cause and effect there, right? So setting expectations, we like to create job descriptions so the employee knows what the responsibilities of their job, summarized, of course, are going to be. That job description is obviously shared with their manager so that the manager now has, a basis on what is the performance that's expected of this employee. And when they don't meet it, there needs to be consequences. We even put that as a policy in the handbook. When expectations aren't met, you might go on a verbal first warning, a final warning, and that may lead at any point to possible termination. We make it very clear in the employee handbook. So guiding managers on how to write up employees properly, when to write them up so it doesn't get you in more trouble, so it drives productivity. It doesn't squash it, and it doesn't make us liable for any kind of litigation. And then the second bucket is, what are we doing for evaluating and appraising that performance, right? If we don't give feedback to our employees, if we don't tell Heather what a great job she's doing, Heather might assume she's not doing a great job and start looking for a job. Conversely, Heather might just be unengaged and think, well, I'm not appreciated here. And then, the flip coin is the person who is just that middle level doing the minimum or a poor performer. If you don't give feedback in a formal performance evaluation, that person thinks they're doing a great job and they're just going to continue to be at that lower level or that mid level. We need to give feedback on, what's going great and what might need some performance improvement.
Okay. So for the kids at home following along, I'm going to flip to page 9. I want to focus on, we're going to shift from the HR priorities during this stage to the HR challenges. Chris, I think yours is kind of self-evident, but let's go a little deeper on background checks. what are some of the challenges, some of the ways that small business owners, and when they're in this stage of growth, that they get themselves in trouble?
I think one of the biggest things that we see with with clients of this range is understanding, one, what background checks are, because they're very nuanced. A criminal background check is not a criminal background check. There's a lot of different ways to do those.
You're
Um,
going to have to explain that, because the words made it seem an awful lot like a criminal background check.
a criminal background check is, it depends. So do they need federal records? Do they need, just county level records? There's just a lot of different things that you can look at there. But one of the biggest things that we see as far as these clients that are challenges are, pre and adverse actions. We see very, very few clients that do that. And if you're familiar with that, basically what happens is if I run a background check and I make an adverse employment decision, I say your background check is not good enough for me and I'm not going to hire you.
No.
By law, you have to let that employee know that I'm not going to hire you. But what you have to do too is give them the ability or the opportunity to contest what was on their report. Maybe it was an error or a mistake. And then what happens is after there's a timeline for all of these things, but then you eventually make the final adverse action if they don't go in and it's not proven erroneous. So there's a big open liability there that a lot of clients have that they're not doing. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges that we see from these groups in our world is not being compliant with the different Fair Credit Reporting Act laws, both federally and then also a lot of states and even municipalities have those now. So it's important they have somebody that they're using, somebody that can support them and somebody that can help them through those processes.
See, this is what scares the hell out of small business owners, because, and I'm not trying to be cute. It's like, well, a criminal background check doesn't really mean a criminal background check because it's nuanced. Okay, well, there's one. Adverse effect of a background check. Well, I hired this guy to do background check, and he said that he did this one thing in the past, so I decided not to hire him. Turned out it was a mistake. Now I'm getting sued. It's like, business owners are just scared to death to make a mistake that I think kind of eventually just say, screw it. I'm going to run this business on gut. I'm going to treat people as good as I can and hope for the best. How do you advise business owners? 'Cause you don't get a choice to not follow the law, right? I mean,
Yeah.
you still got to follow the law. You don't know all the laws.
Yeah. So that's what that background check company's there for. Right. So if what we find too is we'll find folks that'll go out on Google and they'll Google on Mary and they'll say, what's Mary done? But but you can't use that information. And so what I would say is it's important from a risk mitigation to run those background checks and drug tests. And if you have a legitimate partner that's going to make sure that you have all of the necessary authorization forms, the adverse action process, it's all built within their system. That client doesn't have to think about that, right? Because that partner is going to help them through it. It's just like anything else. If you have the right advisors, you're okay.
And Mary, this is where consistency that you were talking is so important, right? It's like, if you're going to drug test, better drug test everybody. It's like, all it takes is a gender, a color of skin, any reason why. Maybe one candidate came in and they smelled like marijuana, but if they were from a protected class and they're the only person you drug tested, you're cooked, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Like, you
100%. And there's a lot of states you can't test for cannabis. And, to Chris's point, on the criminal side, there's a lot of states, there's probably about 20 states that have banned the box. You can't even ask on an application if they have a felony conviction. So the compliance goes so deep, right? That application is the first thing that a candidate, possible future employee sees. And I'd say 90% of the ones that I look at from employers are non-compliant.
and to be clear,
A lot.
the reason to be consistent, it's true that there's a COIA component that protects you, I guess, from you know uh, a lawsuit, a fine, and if you can document that you have good, consistent policies and procedures, that helps you. It's just also simply the right thing to do, right? And when you do the right thing, you talk about focusing on culture. If you treat everybody the same, you're sending a really clear signal to all the employees. There's this thing is special treatment. Everyone is treated fairly and the same. Even if the transaction might have felt a little bit weird or awkward, we didn't feel so family oriented when they had me do this one thing or asked me the thing, because everybody get asked that. It's a fantastic thing for culture. It's not just a way to not get sued, right?
Agreed.
Yeah. Heather, what other challenges do you see that businesses face? And we can let's take Cobra. Sometimes it's just laws that they don't know, and you're going from 16 to 50 employees. You're all of a sudden subject to comply with laws that you weren't when you came into this stage.
Yeah. And it's so surprising to see how many don't know those laws. They're just like, hey, I'm offering insurance now. Like, we're good. And, a lot of cases not realizing it's like, okay, well, now we're offering insurance, we're doing our thing, people are signing up, but now we've had a termination and that person quit. So sometimes employers come to me and they're like, well, he quit. So, we don't have to offer him any kind of extension on this plan, which unfortunately is not true. So, one of the things that we try to do, with our clients is just help educate them. Like, did you know? We do a lot of did you knows because, we find that a lot of people don't have time to read or understand, what some of these things are. But, just having a general idea of, okay, so I'm offering insurance. I have over 20 employees. What are my requirements as a new hire? It doesn't just stop it when they terminate it. It's when they're a new hire too. Like, what are the rights that they need to be aware of? Should they sign up for insurance? 2 years later, they leave the company. They should know ahead of time that they're going to be offered a COBRA extension. So, one of the things that we try to do is educate them that, who are your qualifying events? Is it just a termination? Is it someone that was laid off or riffed, or we go so far to explain that this doesn't just apply to your employees. This applies to their dependents. So, you might have an employee, and this is the biggest one that gets missed, is there's a divorce. You've got insurance on this employee. They're divorced, and now what? Educating the employers that the dependent needs to be offered COBRA. And they're like, well, he didn't work for me. But understanding that the dependents have just as many rights as the employee once they enter that plan.
Yeah.
That's a big thing too. And it's hard because you already have so many other things to stay on top of, like Mary said, with handbooks, and Chris said background checks. And then now you have to, add this on too. It's a lot. It's a lot for employers to digest.
Mary, you and I talk about this all the time. I mean, I'm so empathetic to small business owners. I am one. Been involved in small businesses my whole life. You just don't know what you don't know, and these laws change so much. Maybe people have heard of COBRA in Heather's example, but if the law says, and they'll paraphrase, and correct me if I got it wrong, Heather, if you offer benefits to your employees and you are over 20 employees, and somebody terminates, you have to offer continuing coverage. That's the essence of COBRA.
Correct.
If you're 15 employees, you offer insurance, you don't have to. If you're over 20 employees, but you don't have insurance, it doesn't apply to you because you don't have insurance. So there's this unique thing if you have insurance over 20 employees. That's a simple one compared to the stuff that's being passed by local municipalities on paid leave types, unpaid leave types, overtime this, minimum wage that. Mary, other than the obvious, we'd love to, for you and your team to help anybody listening on the show. How do small business owners keep up with all this?
I really don't know, because a lot of times they'll say, you use the example of Google. I just Google it. Well, you don't know what to Google.
Yeah.
If you don't know these laws exist. And I would say about COBRA, and I'm sure Heather was about to jump in, but if you're below 20 employees, there's plenty of states that mandate mini COBRA,
Yep.
and that mini COBRA means for the mini employers less than 20 employees. So it becomes so complex that, I'm actually so proud that we do these podcasts and we're helping small businesses because it is overwhelming. I can get on a call with an employer who doesn't even know that they have to give I-9s. So every single employer has to give an I-9 to their employees. And I still am on a call or talk to an employer at least once a week who does not know what an I-9 is. And that will put you out of business.
Yeah.
Get audited.
Mary, in the ebook, we talk EEOC in this category. What do business owners need to understand about EEOC? What is it? Why does it apply to them now where it might not otherwise?
Yeah. So one of the biggest pieces of legislation, at least on the HR side, is Title VII. And to govern Title VII, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission was created. So they oversee every piece of Title VII, and there's been quite a few amendments to Title VII. So Title VII, in the easiest terminology, is mandates that businesses do not discriminate based on protected classes, any of the employees. That's a very big, summarization of the law. Now, under Title VII, there's quite a few pieces to it that the government has chosen. And this is on the federal level, right? So the states are just piled on top of it, as well as municipalities. But the Americans with Disabilities Act is probably your biggest piece of legislation there. So again, not discriminating based on somebody's disability. Again, we could go, I could go on and on and on. But one piece about ADA that a lot of people don't understand is it's also, you can't discriminate against their religious rights. And it's also covers perceived disabilities. So if Chris broke his leg and he's walking around limping because the cast came off, and I perceive that that's a disability and discriminate against him, he would be covered by ADA. Lots and lots of pieces there. Some other, pieces that are pulled out of Title VII is Pregnancy Discrimination Act. So that was relatively new. Pregnancy was always covered under sex as a protected class, but now the federal government made it a bigger piece of legislation with a ton of regulations for employers to adhere to. Ton of different regulations.
You and I did an episode on that exact topic. Encourage folks go back in the archives and search. It's so much more specific about pregnancy, not just sex, but it really raises the bar on the burden on the employer for what kind of accommodations it, right?
Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Let's stay going down the list. So we got ADA, we got Pregnancy Discrimination Act. What are some of the others we talk about in the ebook?
GINA is another act, so that's genetic information. It sounds a little bit confusing, but I would give an example and sort of coming off what Chris was saying, Google searching people's information. I've had employers say, well, I'm not going to hire him because I went on Facebook and all over Facebook, he has posted that, heart disease runs in his family and he has heart disease. So I'm not going to hire them. Well, that's genetic information. So, part of that is, again, not discriminating against individuals based on the genetic information. Obviously, you can't ask for that.
This is not the employer and doing labs on a cheek swab. This is having access to information about their genetic background, right?
Correct.
Yeah. Chris, anything you want to pile in here with on Gina? Because this seems background check-ish related, maybe not a formal background check, but a place where employers get in trouble, which is inappropriately, say, using social media content.
Yeah. Now, anything from a background check perspective, one of the, a new thing right now is a lot of people are running social media checks. And so they're going and they're specifically looking for violent posts, racial posts, those kind of things. So there are, that's a new trend right now. And there are companies that will go out and scan all of an individual social media.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, Mary. So we got ADA, we got Gina, we got Pregnancy Discrimination Act. What else?
Yeah, American Age Discrimination in Employment Act. I think that's pretty self-evident, but at some point, even though age was covered under Title VII, what they did was they added an age, and I know you know that age, but we'll tell our listeners it's 40
Are you calling me old?
years old.
Calling me old? All right.
I might be. And it doesn't mean that below the age of 40, you can't be discriminated against, but over the age of 40, you gain extra protections. Like a severance agreement has to have a separate piece to it, et cetera. So I think those are your big ones. Now, you keep saying 50 employees. If we're only at 49, 16 to 49, FMLA does not come into effect, but north of 49, once you hit 50, you're going to be eligible for Family Medical Leave Act.
Family Medical Leave, Affordable Care Act. We'll cover a bunch of those in the next episode. I think the trend that I think for me, if you're following along in the ebook, it's the bottom of the page, Title VII, where Mary started out, prohibits employers from discriminating in the workplace based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. That what we're seeing, not only at the federal level, so at the federal pregnancy discrimination covered under sex, age was you can't discriminate, genetic information. What we see is the categories of race, color, religion, sex, national origin, just getting more and more and more explicit. And it's not just getting more explicit in the definition of those categories, but almost always, like in the case with the PDA, Pregnancy Discrimination Act, it's adding new responsibilities, and those new responsibilities are always on the employer. The burden, it continues. I don't see this changing. I think we're going to see change where there's going to be more and more laws that continue to be passed that increase the burden on the employer. So I'll say maybe the last thing for me in this category would be get used to it when you get to this stage of your growth. I mean, when you're 1 to 15 employees, we talked about last week, you might be a really awesome carpenter, and you do kitchen bathroom modeling like nobody else in business. You got a couple assistants that have helped you scale into a business. You're a landscaper, but your landscapes, your hardscapes, your softscapes are just absolutely gorgeous. You're the professional services firm. You're the domain expert. As you grow your business, buckle up, because not only do you have to have processes that are repeatable to scale, you need the infrastructure, and I'll say the intestinal fortitude that you're going to have to deal with all kinds of legislative requirements that you never did before. Mary, anything else you would add on the compliance side?
Oh, how much time do we have?
Yeah.
We're really sticking to federal law here. I do want to reiterate about I-9. Lots of changes may be coming. And the piece about I-9 for employers not to forget is the E-Verify stipulation in many states. And for whatever reason, it tends to be in the less compliant states. So I do feel New York employers, California employers are uber sensitive to HR laws. They know because everybody's talking about how much compliance there is. But in, some of the other states that don't have as much state compliance, don't forget about the federal compliance, I-9 being a big piece of it, South Carolina, North Carolina, Florida, E-Verify, right? Different thresholds and a little bit different nuances there. But the state, we're sticking to federal compliance here, but there's so much state and municipal compliance. It gets really confusing.
Yeah. So we jumped ahead to go through all the Title VII stuff and the new laws. So that's good. I want to come back and maybe we'll end on what the one section that we skipped over. What HR tools should be in place? And I'd recap where we were last week. The first thing is just getting culture right. You need people that align to your mission, your vision, your values that are going to help you grow your business. And the first thing from a systems standpoint is payroll. You got to pay people accurately and on time, right? I mean, people aren't going to do it for free. You don't even have to be the highest paid provider. And, maybe people just dig you. Maybe they dig what you do for customers, and they're all about it and they want to be part of the mission. No one's going to tolerate getting paid incorrectly, and they're sure as hell going to tolerate getting calls from the IRS because you didn't file their taxes properly. So there's this very, very, very baseline from what HR tools, what systems you need. It's payroll system, payroll and tax. So now you're growing your business. Chris, we'll start with the obvious where you come from. What are the tools and I'll say services? This isn't intended to be a sales pitch for anybody who's on this call. So speak generically about your category. Why do businesses need to be putting in place background screening, and whatever other systems or tools you think are appropriate at this stage in the game?
Yeah. So from a background check perspective, it goes back to process, right? And we've talked about processes a lot. So from a background systems, it's HRIS systems where you can onboard, you're onboarding the same way every time. You can have your background checks that are built within that system, which is very important. That way it's happening every time. I know we've got some rather large clients that don't use HRIS systems for some reason. They have 3,000 clients. So what happens? Things get missed. I-9s aren't done. E-Verify is not done. Background checks aren't running, things like that. So a lot of it is just building that process, making sure that everybody is getting background checked, making sure that it's the same process every time, the same check every time, or at least by class, as well as by drug test, or if they're doing drug tests as well.
How about systems of record and storage? Because I'm going to get a background check done. We certainly recommend it as the best practice. And now I get this information. Do I have to store this in an HR system? Can it be a Google? Does it get printed and stuck in a file cabinet? How should I be thinking about the really super practical tools like data retention storage?
Yeah. So things like that, if you're in an HRIS system, typically it's just going to go into that employee's file. So it wouldn't be anything different than that. If you don't have an HRIS system, typically whoever's running your background check for you, they'll have a platform in which you can store it. And typically they'll have a retention policy, right? So you can have that to where those stay for whatever that period of time that the employer would like. So typically that's kind of how that works.
Okay, great. Heather, how about you? What tools? So certainly you think you see the world through a benefit administration lens. I want your thoughts there, but just in general, from 16 up to 50 employees, what are the HR tools that business owners need to be thinking about?
Well, I mean, for me, a lot of these groups may not even have an HR department. Sometimes the same person that you talk to is the same person that gets the mail. They're doing the accounting, they're doing payroll. So one of the recommendations that, I personally, talk to a lot of especially our smaller groups about is, getting an HR person, using an HR service, something to help keep them educated and making sure they're doing the right thing. But, you know, one of the things I usually err on the side of caution is making sure from an insurance perspective, especially if they're in a position to start searching for that, is, lining up with a broker. Brokers are very educational when it comes to helping them shop for their insurance plans, helping them understand, what that's going to look like as they start to build that out, as they start to grow from, that 15 and up, 16 and up. But, those are my two recommendations is, get yourself some education, especially from an HR perspective and from an insurance perspective.
Yeah. Mary, how about you? What tools? So you guys come in, your team comes in, and you're the HR department in many cases for folks. You need them to have good tools for you to be more efficient. What are the tools that you recommend?
Yeah. And thanks, Heather, for queuing me up perfectly there. So yeah, I think that when we start working with employers, one of the first things we do is an HR audit. And that informs us on sort of the temperature of their HR function. Is it good, poor, excellent? In any case, we can assist them from that point to go forward. And from there, one of the first things that we always do is look at, revise, or create that employee handbook that we talked about. And then we try to assist them with some technology, as you're saying, and we make sure that they are set up to get HR compliance updates on a consistent basis. So that they know what is coming down the pike. You said earlier, how do they know what the new laws are? We're proactively pushing them out to them, but then we take care of it for their organization, right? It may be an employee a handbook update. It may not. Which employees does it go to? How can they edit that policy for their organization, industry, et cetera, if at all? And then how do they push it out to their employees? So those are, I think the beginning of it, and then we talked about job descriptions, very important. I agree with Chris on the HRIS, a very important piece to the HR side of things, because that's how we're electronically onboarding, storing information, and offboarding that employee.
You know what? I mean, as I'm listening to all three of you, when it comes to tools, I come back to where you were at the top of the conversation, Mary. It's how do you make things consistent and repeatable? Right? I mean, you're going to have an HR software. So HR software is on top of a payroll software, then a benefits software and performance management software, and how you're going to store background checks and stuff. It first requires you to define a process, right? Because, it doesn't do any good just to have the tools if you use them random and ad hoc. This is all about, I think all the things we're talking about here is how do you scale? I think 1 to 15 employees focused last week. It's you're establishing a new business. You're establishing customers. You're delighting your customers. You're getting your first group of employees. You're paying them accurately and on time. And now how are you going to scale? You're going to scale with process. You're going to scale with technology and continue to delight customers. And along with that comes all kinds of new challenges, compliance challenges, a lot of Title VII stuff that we unpacked, new laws that you must comply with. Spoiler alert, next week we're talking 50 to 150 employees. And the title of that chapter gets serious about compliance, because today wasn't nothing. Because when you get to employees, all of a sudden the world of compliance starts getting real serious, and you're going to be thinking about staff that helps you, or in-house or outsourced augmented staff that really are SHRM certified HR experts to keep you compliant through that next phase. So, I think with that, I think we'll call the show. I think it was a great show, guys. To me, this is this phase going from 16 to 50. This is about implementing the processes and the tools to help you scale to the next level. And with that, Chris, Heather, Mary, thanks for joining me.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks.
And to everyone else for joining today, thank you for letting us be part of your mission to grow. That's it for this episode of Mission to Grow. Thanks for joining us today. For show notes and more episodes, visit us at missiontogrow.com. If you found this content valuable, I invite you to share it with a friend and subscribe to the show. If you really want to help, I'd love it if you left a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you listen. Mission to Grow is sponsored by Assure. Assure helps more than 100,000 businesses get access to capital, stay compliant, and develop the talent they need to grow. To learn more about how Assure can help your business grow, visit AssureSoftware.com. Until next time.